If you think your job is killing you, just wait until you hear about some of these once common, but now forgotten, occupational diseases. Hey, I'm Laurel Bristow, and this is Health Wanted. Each week, we cover your need-to-know public health topics and break down the science behind them in our pursuit of better health. This week on the show, we're talking ye olde workplace safety. In the immortal words of Loverboy, everybody's working for the weekend. And the fact that we even have weekends to look forward to is the result of decades of work towards labor reform. Workplace health and safety might not strike you as the most obvious public health subject, but given that the average person will spend a third of their life at work, there's a high potential for an impact on health. When we look back at decades of workplace reforms, some items seem incredibly obvious, like setting limits for working hours to prevent exhaustion, which can result in accidents, making working environments safer by having things like ventilation, or preventing children from operating heavy machinery, even if their tiny hands are able to get into tight gearboxes so well. Some of the changes in working conditions were the result of fears that workers' maladies might spread to the public, like the 1895 law that limited the hours one could work in a New York bakery. Not for the benefit of the worker, but because there were fears that tuberculosis could spread from workers to customers via contaminated bread. Many of these changes were, unfortunately, the result of massive workplace accidents, like the tragedy that occurred at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. In 1911, a fire broke out on the top floors of the 10-story building. The factory manager attempted to put it out, but the hose was rotted and its valve was rusted shut. The building had no sprinkler system, rumored to be because the owners had a habit of occasionally torching their own businesses for insurance money, and even worse, many doorways to stairwells were locked. If you asked the owners, it was to prevent theft, and if you asked the workers, it was to prevent bathroom breaks. The fire escape, which was already incredibly narrow, making it hard for multiple people to get down at once, also collapsed under the heat of the fire and the weight of the women trying to escape. The workers, many of whom were teenage girls, became so desperate to get away from the smoke and flames, they began to jump from the highest floors. 146 people died as a result of a fire that lasted just 18 minutes. Such massive tragedies were, unfortunately, commonplace at the time. By one estimate, 18,000 to 21,000 people died of workplace-related injuries in 1912 alone. Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel The Jungle, about a Lithuanian immigrant who comes to America and works in a meat processing plant, is credited with prompting President Roosevelt to sign the Pure Food and Drug Act as a result of the grotesque depictions of a complete lack of food safety standards. But according to Sinclair, the book was supposed to be about how labor practice in America totally and entirely crushed the spirit of man, saying, "I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident I hit the stomach." Now, food and drug safety is no small feat, so ultimately The Jungle accomplished something important, even if it wasn't about labor conditions generally. But there are a number of ailments that used to be commonplace that we no longer see, some due to workplace safety changes, and some due to changing social norms or needs. Take, for example, the Canary Girls of the First World War. As men were putting their bodies on the line at the front, women at home stepped up to take on the labor that kept the war effort running, particularly producing the munitions needed to win. Working in factories to pack artillery shells with trinitrotoluene, or as Wile E. Coyote knows it, TNT, came with the obvious risks of accidental detonation and the less obvious risk of being bombed by enemy combatants trying to cripple manufacturing efforts. But it also had a more eye-catching side effect. It could turn the hair and skin bright yellow. The creation of TNT involved the use of nitric and sulfuric acid, the fumes from which could dye the skin yellow, giving the women the name Canary Girls. The issues with TNT processing were more than skin deep. Some women who were pregnant while working in the factories gave birth to yellow babies as well. The skin discoloration for both mother and child were temporary, but a portion of women developed a liver disease known as toxic jaundice, which was fatal in a quarter of cases. And the plight of the woman worker didn't end there. Stories of railroad tunnel explosions gone wrong or miners getting the black lung are so standard we barely even think of them anymore. But women-dominated fields had some pretty surprising maladies. As gas lamps came into fashion and use, no one wanted to be burdened by the use of a flint and steel to light them. A much more convenient option was strike-anywhere matches, made possible by the addition of white phosphorus to the tip of the matchstick. White phosphorus will ignite instantly in temperatures above 86 degrees Fahrenheit, so striking the match on a surface to create heat through friction will light them, and the matches must be kept in an airtight container lest they ignite spontaneously. But the substance is extremely dangerous when inhaled, and the mostly female workers in match factories found themselves suffering from what was known as phossy jaw. Now, phossy jaw is not a reference to Joel Grey's facial expressions in the 1972 film Cabaret. It's what happens when white phosphorus gets into the bone of the jaw, often through cavities in the teeth, and then stops blood flow to the area. Most cases start with a toothache, and then the opening where the tooth was extracted doesn't heal, followed by a continuous rotting of the surrounding jaw. As you can imagine, necrotic bone and tissue cause a horrible smell, which gave the condition the nickname matchmaker's leprosy for how shunned the women were from society. Many required the removal of parts of the upper or lower jaw, resulting in difficulty eating and speaking. Sometimes it progressed to the point of seizures or meningitis, atrophy of the eye, and spontaneous fractures of other bones in the body. It would take 30 years from the discovery of phossy jaw before countries began to ban the use of white phosphorus, even though red phosphorus was already an available, safer alternative. All this despite newspapers reporting that people afflicted by the condition gave off a green glow from the mouth in a darkened room. And matchmaking was not the only occupational hazard that caused women to glow out of their mouths. The discovery of radium inspired the invention of radium-infused paint, which could be used to write the numbers on watch faces and clocks so they could glow in the dark. The women who painted these numbers on often licked the tips of their radium-laced paintbrushes to get it into a fine point. A practice that resulted not only in sharply painted numbers, but also severe anemia, jaw abnormalities, leukemia, and sarcomas. Today, we know that if something glows like an ooze monster or an alien, it's a sign there's a problem, but back then I guess it was just too cool to be concerned about. Now, gentlemen, if you're getting jealous about the attention that all these women and girls are getting for their workplace ailments, don't worry, we have weirdly specific maladies for you too. Soot warts were a common affliction of the 1700s chimney sweep. In reality, those warts were actually cancerous growths on the scrotum. Why on the scrotum, you may ask? Well, because chimneys in London at the time were both narrow and angular, a combination that meant the best way to clean them was to send a young boy up through the chimney to scrape as he went. The tight, sweaty work meant soot, which contained cancerous compounds, would stick to the skin and slide down the body with sweat, accumulating in the nooks and crannies of the scrotal skin. Exposure was increased by the fact that in order to more efficiently climb through chimneys, many boys worked completely nude. Coupled with the fact that chimney sweeps had a reputation for being indifferent to bathing, why wash off when you're just going to get filthy again, it's a recipe for prolonged exposure to carcinogens. Unsurprisingly, they decided to cut the line from Mary Poppins that went chim chimney, chim chimney, chim chim chiree, I get scrotal cancer 'cause I work naked. Now that I think about it, it seems there's a surprising amount of male-dominated workplace illnesses represented in popular films. In addition to what I can only assume is soot wart metastasizing to the brain, causing Dick Van Dyke to think that's a good Cockney accent, and Zoolander's surprisingly fast progression of coal workers' pneumoconiosis, we have the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. In order to turn a beaver pelt into a top hat, you have to go through a process known as felting, in which the hair of the pelt is softened and matted into felt. It was found that mercury was incredibly useful for this task. The discovery followed a rather straightforward, albeit disgusting, path. Hatters in Turkey who used camel fur for hats found that camel fur moistened with camel urine sped the felting process along. In parts of the world where camels were less abundant, like France, hatters used what they had, which was their own urine. One hatter was alleged to consistently produce superior hats. His secret? He was drinking mercury chloride in an attempt to cure his syphilis. Eventually, hatters cut out the middleman and just began using mercuric nitrate to treat the fur. A potential improvement for customers who were unaware they were walking around town in a pea hat, but deadly for the hatters who were unaware they were continuously inhaling toxic fumes as the mercury-treated material was heated and shaped. Notable symptoms of mercury poisoning include tremors, irritability, shyness, a lack of self-confidence, difficulty walking, hallucinations, and paranoia. Tremors were so ubiquitous in Hatters that they were often referred to as the Danbury Shakes, after Danbury, Connecticut, the self-proclaimed hat city of the world, and it was often mistaken for drunkenness. And if you think occupational injuries are only for blue-collar workers, think again. Even my creatives won't be spared. Some drummers have been afflicted by anthrax spores that were released from the hide of an African drum. And a sometimes fatal condition known as bagpiper's lung can result from fungal spores colonizing the instrument. There are actually a surprising number of occupational lung diseases, including cheese washer's lung, compost lung, farmer's lung, malt worker's lung, sauna worker's lung, wine grower's lung, and woodworker's lung. Surely one of the most commonly heard about lung diseases caused by an unsafe workplace is mesothelioma, a type of cancer that occurs in the lining of the lungs and can be caused by repeated exposure to asbestos, a common insulation product. Despite the fact that we've known there's a link between asbestos exposure and cancer since the 1960s, it wasn't until March of 2024 that the US fully banned the use of asbestos. It might feel like these are all workplace-related injuries of the past, but in reality, new industries create new issues that can also take time to identify. For Health Wanted, I'm Laurel Bristow.